The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. Well, Erica, welcome to The Journey, and let me just explain just a little bit about what The Journey is. The Journey is just trying to capture people's stories, everyday life stories of either opportunities that may have come up in people's lives and what did they do with those opportunities, or maybe some kind of setback and how did they transform through that setback, or how they may have failed forward. And I know I've known you and known your family. I was thinking about it. It's probably like 13 years. So it's been a long time. But so as we get started, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what do you do for fun? When you get an opportunity for fun, what do you do?
Well, I am Erica, and I just graduated from Illinois State, okay. So I haven't had a lot of free time the past few years.
Sure.
But I like to do Starlight when I'm home, the community theater. I like that music aspect in my life again. My family and we like to take trips every summer. We always go to Tennessee and Florida. And then I'm a homebody. I like to be home or outdoors. I don't need to travel extravagantly, but I like to just be around people.
Okay.
And just be together.
Gotcha. So in Tennessee, where do you guys go in Tennessee?
We go to, Nashville sometimes, but we stay in Crossville, Tennessee.
Okay.
We have some friends of my dad's who live down there on Lake Holiday.
Okay.
And then there's another set of friends who live in Franklin who have a lake house in Crossville.
Okay.
And they all kind of know each other. They've known each other since my dad was really young. So we go stay at a lake house there, and it's just our family and a lake, and that's it. We're one with nature kind of thing.
Perfect.
We just play games and eat some food and do some puzzles and eat some more food.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, Diana and I and the kids, on the way to Alabama one time, we stayed in Franklin. And, beautiful yes. town. It seemed very nice from what we saw of the town, and
yes.
so it seemed really, really nice.
They just did a Dickens Village sort of thing there, where they dress up old-fashioned and they carol and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I saw our friends from Franklin posted pictures of it, but that would be the place that I want to be if I moved to Tennessee.
Okay, in Franklin.
Yes.
Okay, nice.
That's a good area.
And I heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard there's a lot of celebrities, country, or just entertainers in general, but
in Franklin?
They live in Franklin.
Franklin and Brentwood, yeah. I know our friends live next door to Blake Shelton's pilot.
Okay.
So that's, he's not a huge celebrity, but that's still pretty cool.
Still pretty connected
yeah.
there. So you graduated from Illinois State, and so a fellow Redbird, that's where I graduated as well. And so
Redbirds.
Yep. And they had a great season this year in football, and it sounds like they're going to have. It sounds like they may have a pretty good basketball program as well.
So, that's what I heard.
Yeah,
I didn't go to any of the games yet.
But, I know that James Robinson from Rockford,
Lutheran,
did really, really well there, and their head coach is from Rockford.
Oh yeah,
Brock's back. And
and I've heard some of his motivational speeches.
Oh really?
He does some speaking things at ISU. So he's pretty good.
He graduated from East at the same year that Rob and Delinda graduated from East. So I don't know him. I played against his brother, his younger brother, when his younger brother was at East when I was at Harlem. But I've never met Brock. Yeah. So but he's done a phenomenal job with the program.
Yeah, I've heard that they have really good camaraderie and stuff as a team, and it's cool to see James Robinson, even though I don't know him. Ethan knows him, my younger brother. But it's cool to just like have someone from home there and cheer him on. And
Well, and it sounds like, he did phenomenal this year, and it sounds like he may have the opportunity to continue playing. There's been rumors that he may continue playing at the next level, so that'll be great.
yeah, it'll be cool.
So just for the people that are listening, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your family and who's in your family, and because you have 2 siblings.
I do.
And then tell us a little bit about your mom and dad and about your siblings, and
Sure.
and you grew up in this area, so
Yeah.
So just tell us a little bit about that.
We have been here my whole life. Let's see. My parents, Rachel and Al, my dad grew up in Freeport, and my mom moved here after she graduated from high school, a few years after that. And then they met here. And then Evan is my older brother. He is back here. He's kind of moved around to some different places, gotten to explore a little bit, LA and Colorado. And so he's had a lot of fun. But he's here. He does a lot of drone stuff and works for a solar panel company.
Oh, okay.
And is always busy driving around, but he seems to really like it, and it's what he's good at. He's extremely smart. So when he talks about it, I just let him talk, and I'm like, that's awesome, because I don't even know half of what you just said.
Sure.
And then Ethan is a junior. That's crazy at Rockford Lutheran.
He is so tall now.
I know. I was just looking at my graduation pictures, and I've got like 4-inch heels on, and he's still a head and a half taller than me.
Sure.
So that's scary. But he's playing basketball and doing really well in school. We're really proud of him. And he's very intelligent and inquisitive, and it's kind of cool to see him go through all the things that I did. He's studying for the ACT and doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that brings back some memories of all the excitement of preparing for stuff like that, and then getting to decide where you want to go to school, and just like the options are limitless for him, But we are a pretty tight, close-knit family. We just like to be together. And my mom is a teacher here for RPS. And I always said I would never be a teacher, and here we are. Sure. I'm a teacher. But so I get a lot of things from her. And then my dad is retired, but he couldn't stay retired for very long, so he's working for like the Postal Service and drives cars and fire department and police department. He's keeping himself busy with all of his buds, so he's busy, and I try to come back a few times a month to hang out with everyone for a weekend. Sure. We like to do brunch and just watch movies and stuff.
Perfect. Well, your mom and dad are great people, and
yeah.
I remember when you were younger and your mom went back to school, and
yes.
so that was not her first career.
No.
And and so I remember that process, which obviously takes a lot while raising a family and going back to school, and that was a major commitment.
Having gone through school myself now, I have so much respect, because I don't know how she did it with jobs on the side and also a family and everything, carting us around everywhere to all of our events and stuff that we were involved in. But yeah, she went back to school. She was a stay-at-home mom my whole life, which looking back on that and hearing my friends' stories from college and all that kind of stuff, I really treasure that time that we had, and I feel like that really made our family what it is. Being able to grow up with my mom there all the time, and she was really able to be invested in our school and our lives, and it took her 8 years to get her bachelor's. Because she was working at Starbucks, and she was going to school part-time, and then still trying to support everything we were doing. And then since then, she's got her master's and a degree here and a degree there, and all of her plus classes and all that kind of stuff. So it motivates me to want to really make the most of my education, and the fact that, the school systems will support you when you get your master's and things like that. Because I've seen just how far she's come in a minuscule amount of time, and being as busy and stuff as she is, it makes me want to get organized and work hard, because I saw her do it through a lot of different things.
Sure. Now, she's in the Rockford Public System.
She is.
What school is she with?
She is Flynn Middle School.
Flynn Middle School, okay.
She was at Rolling Green.
Okay.
I have to keep that straight.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's doing middle school. She really likes to. Now she is a special ed teacher also.
Okay.
So it was kind of cool that we were doing some things at the same time, writing IEPs and figuring out, what information to include on those things. And it was cool to be able to help my mom out then in a program that she didn't know a lot about, because people would be surprised, but regular ed and special ed are vastly different school paths from one another. And I think people would be surprised that, we don't get as much special education in the general ed world as we probably should for those teacher candidates.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I for me, going the social work route, and then I went school social worker. So that I was very familiar with that element, and it is dramatically different than just in social work. It's dramatically different from regular social work or clinical social work or community mental health social work versus school social work. It's dramatically different, and there's so much that an individual who doesn't go the school route won't know regarding the American Disabilities Act and the 504 plan, as well as the IEPs. There's just a huge gap there. But so I'm interested, and I would think I would know this, but you started before, I think, that I got to know you. Sierra was 8, and you guys are 2 years apart? Okay.
Yeah.
And so how did you get into theater? How did you get into theater and dance and that whole aspect? So how did that all start, if you remember back to then?
Well, I was always moving and shaking since I was really, really little. My mom said I took dance classes at Forest Hills Dance Academy, and started doing pageants and things like that when I was really little. And then when I was in elementary school, I got into competitive cheer. And my cheer coaches had recommended to my parents that I go into dance, because I was always dancing and singing nonstop, and cheer is a little bit more rigid, which was hard for me to stand still and stuff all the time. But so I did competitive cheer for a long time, and then we switched back over to more of the competitive dance outlook. And that's how we met Holly at Steps to Grace. Oh, okay. Holly ended up moving behind us and being our neighbor before she even had Landon. So I remember babysitting Landon when he was really little. Okay. And so we met her, and I enrolled in dance classes there. And we looked for musical theater groups around, and I think CTP was some of the first that we found, and Bailey did CTP, and so I had gone to see one of her shows. Okay. She was in Annie. Okay. And so I then met Phil Cooper, who was in charge of CTP, and ended up doing several shows with them. And then through there, because Hannah Ahrens was there, and Sydney Trotter, and everyone. So through there, then we all, I don't know who went over to CYT first, but then that was when it happened. So I think I was, Honk Jr. was my first show. I was a Gosling and a frog.
And that's with YTP.
CTP. So and then YTP is the older one, which they didn't develop until, I don't even know if I was still there at that point. But yeah, we did Honk Jr. and I did Jungle Book. I was a tree. Okay. Big roles.
Sounds like it.
And then Cinderella. Okay. And Rosie and the Nutshell Kids, which I think Dorothy Page Turner wrote. Oh, okay. So did some stuff with her and Phil Cooper, and then Jack Armstrong was my first vocal coach and stuff like that.
That was Sierra's first vocal coach.
Yeah. And then I met the Mayhans because of competitive cheer. So I knew Andrew. Maybe it was through Andrew I met CYT. I don't know. I think everyone is interconnected in some way with all these programs, but I met the Mayhans way early on when I was really, really little.
Okay, because Andrew was in competitive cheer, right?
Yep, he was one of my coaches.
Oh, okay.
Him and Katie Dom were friends. And then he also did, the gymnastics side of things and dance and stuff like that. Okay. And then he ended up working for Holly, and then he started choreographing for for CYT shows, and it was just funny how everyone was catching up with each other.
Yeah. So what was it about making the transition from primarily dancing and primarily competitive cheer and competitive dancing to then now you're performing in primarily in musicals? What was the shift? What was different for you as you moved more into the musical theater? What was different about that for you? Or maybe if it did bring something more for you, what was different there?
I feel like growing up and even now, I'm a very animated person when I, perform and dance, and it just so happened that I could also sing. And so early on, my parents knew that I could sing. I was always putting on shows. We have all the home videos of Erica trying to be the center of attention all the time. And I was always singing for everyone. And I actually started singing. My aunt, Karen, has made several like cassette tapes and CDs, and she writes her own music. And she used to travel around town and do performances. And I don't know how old I was, but I was pretty young, and I performed with her and sang a lot of her original songs. And then my dad's dad, my grandpa Art, it was a first assemblyman in the traveling choir. And so I was always around music, and I feel like my parents could tell that it resonated with me and that it was going to be a big part of my life. And I was always singing, always moving, but I don't know, singing was always something that I knew I wanted to do, and it just took a few tries of all of these, gymnastics and cheer and dance to get to the place where, oh my gosh, musical theater is where I should be, because it encompasses all of those things that I love. And then getting to do it with some of your very best friends just is wonderful. So I was always singing with my aunt and my grandpa and that sort of thing, and at church on the kids choir and on the worship team and stuff like that. But when I made that shift, I really felt like that was where I wanted to be. I do it just to see people's faces, the joy that you can bring people through these songs and through these stories. I feel like sometimes people think musical theater is a little surface level, but there's so much meaning and purpose behind it, and all of these shows have a reason that they were written and a story to be told, and whether or not it resonates with 1 or 5 or 100 people, I feel like that was always what I wanted to do. It just, I don't know, there's something that takes over you when you're on stage, and I'm sure Sierra understands that. You don't love it for yourself, but you love it for everyone else.
Sure, yeah.
So, yeah.
And I know, and I've talked many times, and specifically this past 2 years with the suicide awareness program with Shadow Our Silence, we've talked about how athletics, but also the arts and the performing arts has such a platform to be able to tell a story and see in a matter of a 2-hour performance, see a character transform, and so that it gives the tragic things that happen to a character, and then seeing how they have an opportunity to work through that and see themselves in a way that they wouldn't have seen themselves, and then the audience can participate in that. And I think that's something that's a little bit different with musical theater, because it is, or live theater in general, is an experience.
Yeah.
And we just got done with a run I was helping out with Artist Ensemble with Every Brilliant Thing, and it was just an amazing show. And it was done in the round, small audience, less than 200 people. Well, it was about 100 and 150 or so. And in this particular case, the audience participated with the one actor. It was a one act, one man show, and it could be a woman also doing the part, but it was just really brilliantly done. And so when you think of all the different shows that you've been in, and I know there's been a ton of them, and all the different characters, is there a particular character that you play that stood out for you? And maybe as you did that particular part, it really maybe opened up some doors for yourself, or was it maybe a changing part for you?
I feel like, growing up, there were so many. The first one that comes to mind is Cinderella, which it sounds cliche.
Sure.
Because I grew up believing I was a Disney princess.
Sure.
But I feel like it was my first lead role, which you dream about happening, and then it happens, and you want to give it back. You're like, oh, no, never mind. I can't do it. I'm not good enough. Because you realize you're the center of attention for some parts. Obviously, the show can't be made without anyone else involved, but it was scary for me. And I remember Jack Hill was my director. This was actually the second time I had played Cinderella, and so I feel like from the first time, and this was a CYT written show, so it was same story but different complexity, I think. But I feel like I learned a lot about myself in the process. I was in middle school going into high school, and even though I didn't directly relate with her role of, evil stepsisters and people treating you mean, and but I understood the meaning of someone seeing your true heart and like your true identity, no matter what you were wearing or where you lived or what you were doing or the kind of hand that you had been dealt. How do you change and evolve and make the most of, what you have and fight through all of those obstacles? So I feel like that, even though I was really young, that was a strong realization for me. And it really challenged me, because I had always supported so many people being in the spotlight, and all of a sudden it was my turn, and I was backed by so many people, and that was just a great feeling to know that people believed in you and supported you when you didn't, necessarily think you could do it. This little, 13, 14-year-old girl. So yeah, I feel like that was one that sticks out to me just because it was a dream of mine, and then it became a reality, but it doesn't mean it wasn't scary or really difficult in the process. Yeah,
well, and I think that's a great example of, or a great point of this idea that we long for something, and then when it happens, there on one hand, this dream, so to speak, is coming true, but now there's a great responsibility that comes with that. And just like any type of gift, there's this great responsibility that comes with it now, and now it's real. Now we have to perform. Now we have to, and we don't want to let ourselves down or let anybody else down.
Right.
So there's that.
When you're carrying the weight of this whole story, and then you think about who wrote it and who wrote the music. And you feel like it's a lot of pressure to deliver it appropriately or well, Yeah.
So, and then of course I have to ask too, and maybe it's the same, but if it was different than the show Cinderella, was there a particular show that stood out to you? Regardless of what your character was in that show, was there a particular show that when you think back about it, not only was it enjoyable, but going through the show, maybe it was because of your character or maybe the show itself, you were clearly different afterwards? Can you think of anything that stands out?
Yeah, again, I feel like each show almost, there was that, like, sometimes big and sometimes little transformation that happened. I feel like, Leamas is one that always comes to mind. I just feel like it was a show that in the theater community, it can be so divisive, and there's so much divide and struggle for, like, power struggle for these parts, and it's hard to find that support for your friends when you don't get the role that you want, but then you want so badly to support them, and it's a weird imbalance of things. And I feel like that show really brought to light our community in Rockford and those people who came in from other counties to do it with us. I think it really was a good representation of what can happen when we all have one goal in mind, and that's to deliver the best performance that we can, and without all of those specific people who were in that show doing all the little things that they did, it never would have been pulled off. And I feel like that, that was a big transformation for me, but also for our entire county and for, our group of friends. And it was so fun too, because so many of us were in the chorus, and I had never had that much fun ever, even though it's a pretty sad show. And two, you're delivering something about history too. It's real, and people lived through this time, and actually had to go through these horrible, horrible things. And so, I don't know. I feel like that's one that really comes to mind for, achieving something that I think we set a bar for me in my mind, and I don't think I'll ever, we'll never get an experience like that again, but I cherish that time.
And you were how old when you were in that show? Do you remember?
I think I was a sophomore or junior. It was soon after, not soon after, it was about a year after my injury, I think. But yeah, I think I was a sophomore or junior.
Yeah, that sounds about it sounds right. Well, speaking of that was a very difficult time. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the injury, because that was a difficult time period, and tell us a little bit about that.
So freshman year, April Fool's Day, shattered my knee, and that came with what ended up being, more than a year or so, or maybe longer, of physical therapy and surgeries, and but definitely mental and physical battles for sure. I don't think my life was pretty smooth sailing. I had never had any huge upsets except for a death of a friend when I was young, but since then, I hadn't had to deal with something that was concerning me as much as concerning other people. And as a dancer and a performer, I felt like my world had ended, stopped, done. I had no more purpose in life. And I realize, looking back now and being an educator, I feel like I can relate to so many of my kids, because you feel like you've put all your worth in something, and whether that be, their parents who don't treat them well, or a home that they grew up in, or, their disability that they're diagnosed with. And if you put all your stock and your worth in something like that, you're never going to truly be happy and successful in life in your own way. So I feel like at first everyone was very encouraging about it, and we're going to nip this in the bud, and everything's going to be fine. You're strong and you can persevere. And then we hit a wall after the first surgery, and I didn't get any of my movement back. And it was frustrating. I was doing all the work, and there was just no outcome. And then they realized, the scar tissue had built up, so they had to go and re-break that. And then after that, we started making big strides, but then it came to a point of overcoming all of those fears of dancing again and performing again, and having to rebuild muscle that was completely depleted. And so for me, I felt like I was never going to pursue my dream, because at that point I believed I was going to study musical theater in school, and dance is a huge part of that. And then, early on in high school, I started developing this love for special education and working with, individuals with disabilities. And so I got to kind of do things like that for different community things, and especially for Voices of Harlem, we got to travel, to the Easter Seals and stuff like that. Okay. And I really felt like if I can bring these individuals or students joy in, what might feel like the depths or the darkest places that they've been, or like they feel like they're not seen, or that some people, just don't know how to interact with them, that's okay, because not everyone is built for situations like that. And so I felt like it really helped me to also appreciate, the life I had been given and how I can touch other people through the things that I've gone through. And I remember we went to the Kalahari for spring break, and I was in that wheelchair, and for some reason I just felt like everyone was looking at me like something was wrong. And in my head I'm like, hey, I'm just injured, I'm in a wheelchair, nothing's wrong with me. And that was, I think, where my whole mindset shifted, and I understood what it was like to be looked at like something is wrong with you. Because we're human and we don't like things that are different than us, and that led me to the path that I'm in now. But looking back at that injury, I feel like, without my support system, friends and family, and all of the encouragement and prayers, and it really could have, destroyed my outlook and the things that I wanted to do with my life. But I am so grateful for it, and as much as I would say that I hope it never would have happened or that it never should have happened, I am so glad it did, and I would go through it all over again, because I would never have had the mindset that I have now. And who knows, I could have taken a different path, but I'm really thankful for the one that I have.
Yeah, I clearly remember that. Obviously where we were at, and then of course not knowing at first how severe it was, and then finding out, later on how severe it was, and just that struggle that you had to go through being young, and then. Even from that standpoint, maybe that was one of your very first transformations of going from that it was going to be this dancer and leaning so heavily into that, and then as you continue developing as a performer, your strength in your acting, your strength in your singing seemed to even get stronger at that point. And I don't know if that was necessarily planned. I think that's just what sometimes happens, right? Because you were limited with what you could do from a standpoint of movement, especially compared to what you were before.
Right.
But you put that energy toward the singing and the acting. And
I remember thinking singing was all I had left, and then you realize you're on bed rest for so long, so you have breathing machines and stuff to refix your lung capacity and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think people realize how detrimental something like that was to a little 15-year-old girl. It's just a knee injury. Well, it affects so much more than that, mentally, physically, standing up. It affects everything that goes up your back and your breathing and things like that. And I think I definitely, geared what I was doing then towards that singing and acting. And it really kind of pushed me to not be complacent with where I was at as a performer, because I knew, those were my weakness. Like, acting was definitely my weakness. And if I ever wanted to be successful, so then it turned into a competition with myself of, I need to get so much better, because if I want to study this in school, and I didn't realize, what was happening on, in the background or behind the scenes, that, my heart was kind of changing and my perspective was changing, about what I wanted to do with my life.
Sure. So you graduate from Harlem and you go right away to Illinois State.
Yes.
And that was a big move, because, well, anyway, anytime you leave high school, you leave your community, and you go off to a 4-year university, it's big. So tell us a little bit about that experience. It's 2 hours away, but it might as well have been
a day.
20 hours away, right? So what was that experience like? And I remember all the excitement building up to it, and that's what most people, after they graduate, and this is where I'm going to go, and this is what I'm going to do. And what was it like?
So first, I was not planning on going to Illinois State until well, we had randomly visited there for a culinary competition that I was doing, and my mom was begging me to just, tour, just take a tour of the school, get a T-shirt. She enticed me with a T-shirt. That's how easily I'm convinced. And so I did, and I actually loved this little town of Bloomington Normal, the little uptown area. I felt like it was just very homey, reminded me a lot of here. And so then we came back, and that was junior year. Then senior year, I'm looking at places. Heart is set on Belmont. I'm going to study music therapy.
Yes.
I'm finding a way to bridge the two worlds. We toured Western Illinois. We toured Northern Illinois. And so Belmont for me was out of the question, just monetary reasons, which was okay, because then I realized, why don't I just do 2 years at RVC, and then I'll either go there or go to Illinois State or something, and for education. So my mom and I planned on a whim to go to a preview day and do this overnight thing. And we were sitting in the music education program, not knowing where we were supposed to be at, and we walked over to the room next door, which happened to be special education. They started talking about all these waivers and all of these things, basically free tuition, and that caught my mom and I's ears, and we went home and we applied for all those things. And I figured, I probably wouldn't get them. I was kind of late in the game and things like that. So then senior year finishes up, and I'm registered at RVC, and I'm prepared to stay there for 2 years, and I'm feeling good about being home. I'm going to teach for the studio, and I'm just going to be in my comfortable zone. I'll be around friends. And then we got letters like late summer that I had earned these awards for your tuition and for the special ed waiver and things, and the teach grant. So then we're making a split decision. What do I do? Do I go to RVC? Do I go to Illinois State? I don't even have anything for a dorm. I'm not ready for this. So then we had about 3 weeks to get everything for my dorm and make the move. And it was kind of a decision. It was hard to make at first because we had come to terms with the fact that I was staying here, and I am a creature of, habit and planning and organization, and all of a sudden the plans changed, and I'm not very spontaneous, so that was difficult for me. But it was definitely the best thing, obviously, that has happened. And so then I went there, and you're right, it's only 2 hours away, and at first I was like, oh my gosh, this is too close to my parents. I need to be further away and be independent. But little did I know that that was the greatest thing that could have happened, because I came home a lot freshman year when I didn't think I would. But, that turned out to be a difficult year for me, mentally and physically, and finding yourself, finding your purpose, and learning in a completely new and different and difficult environment,
Well, I know when I had heard you tell your story about this before, and it was the first time that you had said you realized those things that you had just taken for granted. And again, just those simple things. I think a lot of people do that, up until that point in your life, you had always known the people that you were around. And so friends was all new, right? And that was all different space. And obviously the other things about, trying to figure out where everything's at and things like that. But you had done those things a little bit more maybe before, but this idea of the majority of people that you now were coming across you didn't know them. And there wasn't those long-term friendships and I know that was a big shift for you. It came as a shock, because I had done trips before, and I'm a very independent and headstrong woman, so I wasn't expecting to
all of a sudden, have this culture shock of not knowing anyone. And you're right, it was getting used to this whole new environment. It was me regulating my time and my schedule, and I was responsible for me and wanting to do well. And, it just became this battle of needing to be so great, but what does that actually even mean? And this idea that I had in my head was so skewed from what our real purpose of greatness is. And I feel like it was a great learning opportunity for me, because I had always known the people that I was around, and I don't know if that was the most difficult aspect of it, but I just, I started to exclude myself from things and to, stay home from classes, and because I had developed this social anxiety going into these big lectures when you don't know anyone, and it felt like everyone knew someone there except me, and you feel like everyone's looking at you, and then it comes, as women too, and I'm sure as men, that you compare yourself to others. And my self-worth had plummeted, and I felt like I was lost, and I wasn't good enough, and I just, so I started to stay home, and wasn't doing well in some of my classes, which then became another battle of, I had always done well in school, and I love school. So it was frustrating for me, and I was mad at myself. Why aren't you doing well? Why aren't you, enjoying these things? This is supposed to be the best 4 years of your life, and things like that. So I just, I felt lost, and I didn't know what my purpose was. And I think, too, I missed music so much that I didn't know if studying education was the right thing for me. And so many of these girls and guys that I had met going into this program had done special ed, like their 4 years of high school. They had, either had siblings or family members, or they were always doing something with Easter seals or therapeutic rec or day schools. And I had never really had that sort of experience. I just had a heart for it and knew that's what I wanted to do. I had limited experience, but I just felt like everything I was doing was comparing myself to others, which is such a silly thing to do coming from me, because I feel like I preach to other people that, that's not how we should live our lives. And
I think I think when the words that came to me when you were talking about first getting down there is this idea you were vulnerable. You were like this complete state of vulnerability, all these unknowns, all these different situations, and so all those things that you might have been able to protect yourself from that vulnerability prior to going were now being exposed, right? And then in the midst of that vulnerability, there becomes this vicious loop of that comparison, because you're trying to find some ground. You're trying to figure out some kind of space to get grounded, and where do I fit in here? Where do I not? Well, so this must be the reason why I'm feeling this way, and all those things. And I think it is very. It is very common. I remember going down to Illinois State. I went to Rock Valley for 2 years and went down as a junior. And the guys that I lived with were guys that I knew from high school, middle school and high school, but they weren't necessarily, I played football with them and I knew them, but it had changed. The 3 years prior to that, we hadn't really hung out that much, even though we were, closer before. And I remember going down there, and again, it was a junior, so I would have been 19 or so, right? Yeah, it was 19. And there was this element of completely out of my element, and I was shocked at that as well, because I had traveled all over. I'd already won the Mr. USA. I'd already won all these bodybuilding shows and competed all over the country, but this was different. There was something different about being in this space, and I hadn't thought about it in a long time. But when you were talking, is that there was this vulnerability, and who are you going to be while you're here? And I remember the very first, within the first couple days we were there, we went to a big house party, and there was there was tons of people there, of course, and I just remember there was multiple kegs, and and there was I met some girl that she had worked out, and I met her for the first time, and somewhere in the midst of that conversation, she had started talking about church, and she had invited me to go to this particular church that was on campus. What was the name of that?
It
was right on campus. It was right.
Does it start with an E? It's by the Bone Student Center.
Yeah.
It's like a little house looking thing.
Yeah.
I want to say it's Elevation or something.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was
Evolve or something.
Yeah, it was just a community church. It was just this, and but that was a grounding place for me. That was a place where that grounded me, and that was the beginning of that, and the working out, and because I was still competing, and so there was an element, but there was a ton of that comparison element that you were talking about. I mean, I was a bodybuilder, so constantly you were comparing yourself to other people, So when you think about that time period, and in what in discovering Erica there, what were some of the things that you discovered about what came out of that? What are some things that for yourself that came out of going through that experience that probably wouldn't have happened if you wouldn't have gone?
At the beginning of freshman year, too, I went through sorority recruitment, which is a big comparison game. So you think when you go into that, and you also have this Hollywood view of what it's supposed to be like, and it's not like that at all. It was the most emotional week ever. And I had toured these homes of these sororities, and I found one that really resonated with me, and the conversations I had made me feel like I was understood and like I belonged to something. And I ended up doing Legally Blonde down there at a community theater, and so I was spending all my time there. I was there every night of the week, and I had met a girl, Courtney, from Byron, and she was one of the first friends that I made besides the girls on my floor, but she also went to church, so we got to go to church together, but she was also in a sorority, so it was like we had these things in common. So she ended up being my first friend that I feel like grounded me and kept me going. And then because my time was all spent at Legally Blonde and doing the show, I didn't really get involved in sorority life until like second semester or like sophomore year. And then I ran for positions, and I ended up meeting some of my very, very best friends who I feel like really, looking back, those were the people who I was meant to meet. They were a purposeful part of my path, and without ISU, I never would have met them. And I feel like they really, kept me grounded with our library dates and our coffee dates, and just spending time together and learning about, how different we all were, because I feel like we grow up in what seems like sometimes a bubble, because we do all know each other and we're not exposed to all these different things in our comfortable zone. And so I felt like really, getting to know some of these girls changed my perspective and made me feel, purposeful and like I was seen by girls who had never even known me, which was a little bit of a battle too, because I'm very limited with my trust, and it's hard for me to trust people and for them to for me to feel comfortable sharing with them. And so it was a little bit of a battle of, these girls have not known me my whole life, like Bailey or Sierra or someone. Do I really trust them with opening up myself to them? And now we are best friends for life, and I'm so glad we did. And I feel like they really are the ones who encouraged me. And I mean, and people here, but they encouraged me to be myself and, to push through all these things. And it was nice because they were going through similar things, even though it may not have been exactly what I was going through. But, they were able to relate to the fact that you are in this new place and meeting all these people that you've never seen before, and you're in a battle with, comparison, but also, balancing school and your mental mindset and eating healthily and all of those things. And so it was nice to kind of finally be understood and have those people I could really lean on, for that. But I think my biggest takeaway was just this idea of perseverance. I think it's something that we so easily talk about because these big things that happen in our life, but this wasn't necessarily a big thing. It's just a thing that, people do. They go to college and no one ever talks about their experience except how fun it was. And for me, I would never do it again because part of me wants to do it again because I wish to get all those things back and to, live it to the fullest and join every club that I could have instead of excluding myself from those things. But then the other part of me, doesn't want to because it was a difficult learning experience, but I never, would have realized all of these different things about myself and how I handle stress and how I needed to learn to cope with different things and also to voice, these feelings of anxiety or depression or things that I'd gone through that had never been a part of my life until now and even weren't really spoken about in our family. And so that was also, it brought up topics in our family and Evan was able to relate to some things, and then it became way more comfortable and we realized, this is real life. You don't have to experience, a great loss or, something extremely devastating to feel these feelings of hurt and depression and anxiety and, all of those other mindsets that come along with that. And so I think it was, it made our family closer by talking about all those things, but also really made me understand, what some of my students might be going through with these emotional disabilities that I think are so easily misunderstood of, they're just trying to get attention or whatever the reasoning might be. But I am able to relate in my own way of, this is how I persevered, and though my story is different from yours, here's what I took away from it, and here's, what I had to do to overcome these mind battles that you were at with yourself.
Well, and when you talked about perseverance, and you're right, I think we do talk about it as, this admirable quality, that you have to have and all these things, but to develop perseverance means you have to have hardship.
Yeah.
So the hardship comes with it. You don't go buy it at a store, right? You don't buy perseverance at a store. It's literally as something that comes as a result of some type of hardship or setback or struggle or suffering, and that is part of it. And it's hard as a parent to watch when one of your children are going through it, as well as when you go through it yourself. And but it is one of the things that is amazing, though, is that as we persevere either through an injury, like you had with your leg, and that changed some perspective, or when you went away to school. And you're right. It seems on paper like it's supposed to be so simple, but for some people maybe it's easier than others, and maybe there's things that seem to fall in place a little bit easier, or maybe at that point they aren't faced with some of those realizations that may come at a later date. And there's so many things that can add to that, right? If you're in the wrong major, or you run in with a couple bad professors that you don't match up with, or you have a relationship struggles or things like that, so can add to that as well. One of the things I wanted you just to touch base on, if you can think about it, and we don't talk about this either much, right? So we grow up, and because of proximity, because of familiarity, Bailey and Sierra and these different people were friends. We've always been friends. I don't remember not being friends, that type of thing, right? And then you go at an older time period in your life, and now you're a young adult, and you have to learn how to be a friend. You have to learn how to make friends. If you think back to some of those lessons that you learned, what are some things that Rachel, you're not Rachel, your mom's Rachel.
I go by Rachel too.
that Erica had to learn about herself, that had to come out in Erica to be able to make friends? What were some of those things, if you think about it?
Well, first, I am super, picky about who is in my circle. And so I felt like, I was seeing all of my, maybe friends from high school or whatnot, making all these friends and acquaintances. And to me, I didn't feel like that was me. I would rather have a smaller circle than a bunch of acquaintances. And it was like all these people were going out partying together. But at the end of the day, if I were to call you up with a problem, would you ever be able to sit down and help me? And so I think I was a little too picky too, in a good way, but also it kind of hindered me from making friends right away after I had kind of worked through some of my personal things. But I feel like I wanted those people who were going to be there for me, and I had to develop that trust of it's all or nothing, Erica. You need to, and I'm so bad at heartbreak, and it still is so hard for me to go through things like that, but I've gotten so much better with not taking things like that personally. And so I was really learning, if they walk away, that's on them. I don't need to carry the burden of that friendship, losing that friendship or relationship. And so I feel like even in this past year, I am still learning how to be, that friend, a good friend. And I sat and had a conversation with a friend until like 5 a.m, and we were it's hard because we live in a world where social media is just so deceiving. It's the best thing that we've created and also the worst. And so I feel like I excuse, reaching out to friends because I see all their stuff and I see how they're doing. I liked your picture. I know how you're doing. You're doing good or well. But is that true? Because I'm like, what do I post? I don't sit here and post, hey, I'm really sad today. I'm going through this. And so we really, honed in on the fact that we need to try to have that phone call, when we can. And even though we're both extremely busy, finding that time to check in on your friends and their well-being is so important, because I had no idea a friend was going through something that I had kind of sort of been through before, but, experiencing all those things that aren't really talked about vocally or in her family. And so I feel like it's been a process, but we, check up on each other, and we, try to do things that are personal and not just, hey, I saw this on Facebook, but how are you really doing? In a way, and how can I support you? And she's also a teacher, and teachers carry the weight of so many of the things that their students are going through, as I'm sure you know that. But so it's good to check up on your friends and their well-being, more so than just seeing their social media, but really, how are you? What can I do for you? And also reaching out to those friends that you have had in your whole life, for your whole life. I know with Bales, like, we've always been together, and so being apart in college was hard for me, and I know it was hard for her. And you develop different groups of friends, and then you are trying to find a way to bridge all those people together, because you want it to be one perfect world. And luckily, it kind of happened that way for me. now because all my friends are so similar now. But just keeping that communication, and I'm still learning how to do that and how to be a friend and a good sister and things like that. And sometimes I also feel like I'm a burden, and so I don't reach out to people with things that are going on, but I'm really like learning to work through things. And my parents are the first people I go to for most everything. And but letting my friends in on that, and my life doesn't need to be perceived a certain way on social media. And I've tried to talk about that a little bit on my social media, that, this isn't real life. This is just a highlight reel.
Right.
These are just a lot of the fun trips I go on or things like that. But, so I feel like just reaching out and checking up on people and, following through, with your word. And I've really, overcome a little bit of my social anxiety of like, I would get nervous to like go to sorority events or speak in front of people because I was always scared of what they were going to think that I meant and not what I actually meant. And, what was I going to be perceived as? But, I've just come to the realization that people are going to want to think whatever they want to think and perceive from whatever I say. It's my responsibility to follow through with those things and just be myself and not worry about, what people are thinking or saying.
Well, you one chapter just closed, right? Graduating with your bachelor's degree in special education.
Yep.
And now a new chapter is about to open. I think you said that actually you're going to be doing some visiting and some previewing of the school you're going to be working at. Just this week, you're going to be going down this week, and then you officially start in January, right?
Yeah.
And so this will be a new school. This will be new people, and then all those expectations, right, will be coming up again. And I would love to have a follow-up conversation with you because I know for me, having watched educators and being a former educator, and that first year, the first 2 years is new. It's everything's new, and working your way through that. And so some of those things of lessons that you've learned throughout your life are going to be opportunities to reflect back on as you're coming through this, now launching your career and getting into it. And so I think that idea of, like you said, perseverance, gravitating and knowing what veteran teachers you'll be able to lean into, and at the same time, just being you, right? Just being you. You're going to be teaching what grade?
So I was in high school right now. I was dealing with kids who are older than high school age too, but now I'm going to be elementary resource.
Elementary, okay.
So it's going to be a huge shock, but it's also resources what I thought I always wanted to do. Okay. And I love it so much, but I also really loved the high school students who I've been with. I just feel like these kids just need so much love, and it's not something that, I struggled with in college was, the writing of the lesson plans and all this kind of stuff that is purposeful for me to understand what I'm doing, but it's not realistic for me in the education world. I'm going to have to write things and, do IEP paperwork and things like that. But first and foremost, kids are not going to learn from someone that they don't like or they don't trust. Right. So it was important for me to just get to know my kids, and it made leaving these high schoolers who I thought, hated me since the beginning. Sure. And then I see that they didn't, and developing those relationships. And so it's going to be different. It's more fun sometimes with elementary kids because I think they gravitate towards you and they cling on to you faster than high schoolers. But it brings me such joy when you break down those walls, because I had those same walls, going into college and things like that. And now it's less about all this lesson planning and, all the ISU side of stuff, but it's I feel like I've developed a confidence with my teaching, and I just feel so good about, my education that came out of ISU. Though it was difficult and I wanted to quit many times, I feel like it made me stronger, but I definitely feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. And these elementary kids, it's so important that they get their minutes in their IEPs because it could be the greatest impact that you have on them, those 30 minutes every day.
Yeah. Well, and I know for me, having Caleb had dyslexia and a process delay, and those time periods for him, he didn't necessarily, from what I was aware of, didn't necessarily deal a lot with the stigma that happened with it. Though I do remember when he got pulled out, there was an element of that was hard for him. But there was an element where he really needed that, realizing he had to learn differently, how he saw things, literally how he saw things, were not, they were inverted, and how his verbal processing was so much stronger than his written processing, and he had to learn how to study differently. He had to learn how to write differently. And now he's, finishing up graduate school, and he's gotten so far all A's in graduate school. And so and I don't, other than having conversations with him, through the last couple of years of undergraduate and graduate school, I don't assist him at all in writing. I mean, he'll ask me to look something over, and I'm interested in what he's writing now because it's social work. But it is exactly what you said, that fundamental, when you can intervene and connect with the students at that early level and show them there's a path out of that darkness of their learning difficulty, or that they just learn differently. So, Erica, as we get ready to wrap up today, if there's anything that you can think of that you would want someone from your experiences regarding setbacks, one was physical and then another one was emotional, and maybe social, I guess. If there was anything that you would want to part with, what would something like you want to wrap up with?
I think just to talk about things. I think we live in a world where I think we're getting more adapt to the fact that we are all experiencing things and going through things and getting more comfortable talking about them. But for me, people didn't talk about these things growing up, and like kids being pulled out of classrooms, it was always seen as, oh my goodness, where are they going kind of thing. But now, with my experiences, I've learned not to compare them to anyone else's. It's for me to experience and to understand. I think just to talk about it and to find that support system, even when you think it's minuscule. When I thought college was supposed to be easy, I never wanted to talk about all these feelings I was having inside. And if I wouldn't have, it did kind of bubble over, but it could have been worse than it was, and I may not have finished or whatever may have you. But yeah, I think just, learning to find that confidence and that purpose in yourself, and not to put that in anything, not to put your worth and your understanding in things other than, pushing yourself and just finding things that you enjoy and that you're good at, and those people that you feel supported by, and not to compare your experiences to anyone else, because if you do that, then you're never going to give yourself credit for the things that you're going through. So.
Well, perfect. Erica, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You sharing your story and sharing some of the things that you've gone through, and then this exciting new path that you're on now. So again, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today as Erica shared her story about what may, on one hand, seem to be ordinary things. As Erica shared, that the biggest thing that we can do is talk about it and find out that other people may have had the same experience. So thank you very much for being with us today, and we'll see you next week.